Hey everybody, again this is Christine Pratt. I'm our content manager here at Boostability, so thank you for joining us on our webinar here about featured snippets and position 0 or rich snippets. There's a whole lot of titles. We're going to talk about all of it and how you differentiate it. So we know this is a really hot topic in the SEO industry right now, and we're excited to get started. So before we get going, and before I introduce our guests, you can follow us along on Twitter. It's at Boostability. Ask any questions there. We'll be moderating it throughout this webinar, or you can also ask us here through the GoToWebinar platform. So I'll remind you of those a couple other times. Feel free to ask any questions. We'll also go through some of those at the end, and then as we go along. So without any further ado, we'll get started. Brady Amerson and Mike Marsh are our panelists today. I'll let them introduce themselves just a little bit as we get further into it, but they are SEO experts here at Boostability, and we're really excited to have their expertise. And then here's some of the things that we want to cover in this webinar, so you kind of get a little feel for what we're doing, what are featured snippets, structured data, things like that. So what are they, first of all, what do they do, why they matter, and then how you can implement it. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and we'll get started right now. I'll turn it over to Brady and Mike.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine. We're very, very excited to be here today. We're excited to talk about this hot topic. When we initially were thinking of things to do for the webinar, it's something that we know it's very, very important, but I'll introduce myself a little bit more. I'm the SEO manager on the marketing team. I've been in the industry for about 7 years, and so it's something that I've really, really enjoyed. And I'm going to read a little excerpt, I believe, is what I'm going to do.
Oh no, you're Mike. We haven't said your name, so you can know who the voices are talking to you.
Oh, okay, okay.
This is Mike you're hearing right now.
First time jitters, little nervous. Welcome to the webinar. I was like, oh, I'm being waved at. Okay, well, so I'm Mike Marsh. I'm the SEO manager on the marketing team in the marketing industry for 7 years. I've had extensive experience with SEO, email marketing, link building campaigns for in-house and agency teams around the country. I've been with Boostability for about 5 years. I've managed the offsite content link building team for 4 of those years. And I've just been passionate about the SEO industry ever since getting in about 7 years ago. That's me.
That's you. Yeah. And my name's Brady. I have about 20 years, almost 20 years of experience in web development, building websites, applications. I have a huge passion for digital marketing, more specifically technical SEO. I've spent the last 4 years managing Boostability's implementation team. We specialize in implementing content and technical solutions to enhance user experience, search engine crawlability, improve page rank for our clients' websites. To date, my team has made over 80,000 technical SEO implementations, from integrating structured data or schema markup, what we're going to talk about today, to optimizing speed performances for websites, servers. We've done this on over 20,000 websites now. I've used a lot of variety of technologies, from LAMP stacks to WIMP, a lot of other nerdy acronyms that we won't go into, but yeah, I have a lot of experience in all the different builds, WordPress, React, whatnot.
Yeah, I think that everyone is in for a treat today. So I'm really excited to have Brady here and that we get to talk about it and that we have everyone listening. As we go through this this webinar, I just want to give a little context, a little how we're going to be using the slides, what to expect going forward, and yeah, basically to give you a little context, we want this to be very conversational, as far as it's going to be me and Brady talking about the things. We've done a lot of pre-work for this webinar. We've researched a lot of different things, and we just want it to be very conversational. The way that we're going to be using the slides in this is it's going to be like the topic that we're going to go through. So if you're just listening along, You can just listen, put us on in the background, listen to us while you're at work, and you can look at the slides later if you'd like, but it's not going to be necessary to follow along, hopefully, as we go through.
There will be some slides where you'll want to reference to help better understand the content that we're talking about, but by and large, we want this to be a free-flowing conversation, and we want to be able to just go through the slides and talk about it, but there's a good chance we might kind of go a little bit off topic.
Okay. Well, what do we have in front? Where are we on the position 0?
Position 0.
Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we want to go into what position 0 is. So the name of the webinar is Featured Snippets, How to Get Position 0. So what we want to do is we want to kind of go in through the definition of what position 0 is. In the industry, there are a lot of terminology that has been thrown around. A lot of things that you have position 0, you have rich results, you have rich snippets, you have featured snippets. You've got all of these different terminologies, and we want to make sure that what we're saying in this webinar is consistent throughout. So when Brady and I were preparing for this, we kind of like, okay, what is position 0? It's essentially the result that comes above all of the organic. It comes as typically in a featured snippet, but it can be a lot of different results, rich results, as we'll go into and kind of define as well. But position 0 is what's on top. Now that's a little bit different from what a featured snippet is, which a featured snippet is a format in which maybe a position 0 or it could be not in position 0, but a featured snippet is part of a SERP.
Right, yeah, I think if you were to look at a SERP, you'll find rich results all throughout the SERP. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be on the top. Sometimes you'll see some organic results and then a set of videos or a sidebar or a card. Let's go ahead and go through some of those examples. So how we've defined this, or how we look at it, is we have rich results, and rich results includes basically everything that you would see. A featured snippet, it could be, for example, a book or a recipe. You've seen these when you're Googling, you're querying a search, you'll find a lot of different results there. You could see recipes, you could see let's see,
reviews. You've got the people also asked. It's anything that enhances the SERPs, right? That's kind of like the overall category. We're looking at rich results. These enhance, these enrich these organic results and modify them in some way. The next one that we have up is a featured snippet. Now, a featured snippet, we have it underneath rich result. It's one of these types of results that enhance the SERP. It's often attributed, or it's often displayed in a paragraph list or video form. And the examples that we have there, it's the top right is a featured snippet, the bottom left is a list, and the bottom right is a video. And these are different displays of different types of featured snippets that Google has deemed worthy to kind of invert the snippet. So it's, as opposed to seeing the link as blue or purple if you've clicked on it and then the meta underneath it, they have an excerpt from the actual content above or like listed above, or a video that has a specific location, and then the link underneath it with a box around it, right? That's the featured snippet.
Other rich results that you'll most often see would be something called a carousel. This could be, say you're querying movies, you could get a list of different movies at the top. Top stories, in this example we have, say, NFL scores, and then you'll see a rich result that contains a carousel of different news articles. Same thing with the recipes. You've likely seen these things. The cool thing about these rich results is they provide an image, they're providing an aggregate review, and often you'll see actual ingredients or other sort of descriptive things regarding the content that you're querying.
Yeah, Another type of rich result that you can see is an article. An article, basically, it's just a bigger image that's displayed within the SERP, normally in between organics, where it's just talking about news stories, top stories. And in a lot of instances, all of these rich results are intermixed. In like a carousel, you can have an article carousel, you can have a video carousel, you can have a lot of these different displays displayed in different ways throughout. And so depending on like how you have the content optimized and what Google wants to actually dish out as they deem appropriate, they will display it differently. So for example, on the slide that we're looking at in the article, there's one that's not a carousel, but it looks very similar to a carousel, referring to the Salt Lake Tribune, and it just has those 3 articles. And then on the left, there's like almost a table of articles, where it's just a good article. And the reason why we're going through all this, like a lot of this is probably old information or people are familiar with this, but if you're not familiar with these types of results, it's good to get a picture of this is what it looks like. And what we want to do is we want to go into, okay, how did these come to be? Why?
How do I get one?
Yeah, how do I get one?
How do I have my website show this? Yeah.
Yeah, and because it's a great opportunity for business owners, it's a great opportunity for agencies to understand the technology behind how these results are displayed and how you can get them going forward.
Yeah, our next slide, this is another very common rich result, and probably one that would be really relevant to a lot of you business owners, is our local business listing. So you'll often see this if we were to, for example, in this Google or query TG hair studio, this would be a result that you would often see on the right side sidebar of the SERP. This is going to provide a map, reviews, location, hours of operation. In this situation, you can book an appointment right there from the SERP. So this is something that is actually real easy to obtain, and we want to talk about how you would get those things to show up.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's very, very beneficial for businesses. I think in this specific example, it's a mobile version of, like with the TG Hair Studio, you're seeing the call, the directions, the website. It's all itemized as far as the details to your business, the things, how you can interact with that business, and in instances, you can see the aggregate reviews on that specific listing right there. And we'll kind of talk about how you can optimize your content or your knowledge card, your business card, for Google SERPs. As I was going through, and on this specific instance, like with local business listings, because it's so important, I was doing a little bit of research and I posed the question. It was, if I have a Google My Business, which a lot of people do and a lot of businesses do I need to use specific markup to identify these different elements? The answer that I got was yes.
Yep.
And it was, and I've linked in there, so if you look at the slides and you look at them later, you can check that link out. It's essentially someone asking Google, hey, if I do this, do I also have to do that? And the idea behind that was, yes, you do, because they're pulling from 2 different databases. One's pulling from Google search results, and then another one's pulling from Google Maps. They work off separate algorithms. So the more information that you can provide to Google, they can then dish out that information in their SERPs as they deem appropriate.
Right.
And so that's something that I found very interesting, where it's like, even though you have this Google My Business card and you've optimized it that way, it's also very important to include specific data and markup within your content and within your site to also identify that on your site, not just with Google My Business.
Right. So now probably the question a lot of you guys have is, how do I get this? And that's what we want to talk about now. How did rich results come to be? What do web crawlers actually understand from the website, from your website when it crawls it? How HTML alone doesn't hold up. You need additional markup, and we'll go into some examples about that and show you specifically the differences between a basic HTML page and one that's marked up and how Google understands it. But I think before we get into that, I think it's good to preface the history of the internet and Google and how it operated, why we needed a more semantic type web, because it just didn't exist in the past.
Yeah. That need, as we're going to go through, that need was resolved through, or not resolved. I don't want to say resolved. I would say that the need evolved throughout time, and we want to kind of illustrate those points, like Brady said. And that was done in a lot of ways through structured data and through structuring the internet.
Yeah, this is a term you.
Well, before we get into that, we do have one question that came in that I want to address while we've been talking about these specific examples. It's snippets both enrich and enhance independent search results? Question mark. Just is that
correct? Yeah. So the question is, do they enhance the search results and enrich them? Yeah. Yes, they do. This is separate from just a regular organic result, right? So in a regular organic result, you would just have the URL, the meta description, that description there, and that's about it. Where rich results or rich snippets add more additional content for the searcher, the Google searcher to see. Obviously, these sort of things are a lot more flashy. So from a business perspective, you want to have these rich results, right? This is going to provide more information, allow users that are searching to see this and say, hey, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I understand this a little more, versus just a regular old organic search result.
Yeah, and the examples that we went through, like these are just the high level examples. It's not a comprehensive list. And the terminology that we used in the slides was pulled directly from Google. Brady and I have talked, and sometimes it's like Google explains it, but only it's like a surface level explanation, and sometimes the explanation is off a little bit, where it's like
we're talking about, I think, about 10 years of history with Google introducing these featured snippets and how to do it, and with that they've changed their own terminology. They've sort of branded things differently as they went along. So they're loose terms. Don't take them as a dictionary. This is what it actually means. They are loose terms. But to answer the question, yeah, exactly. These are rich results. These enhance the SERP.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, guys.
So getting back to the semantic web, what does that mean? What are we talking about? When we're talking about semantics, we're talking about the disambiguation between items, the disambiguation between keywords, right?
Right. So if we look at how, we have this slide up right now, structured data. Structured data is a term that you'll hear often when it comes to marking up your content. Really, it's more of a computer science term. Essentially, here's the definition. It's data that's been organized into a formatted repository, typically a database, so that the elements can be made more easy for processing, searching, querying. This example we have right here is what's known as a relational database. This is where information would be stored. Let's say for your website, you have your customer information on one table, you have invoices on another, orders, products, all these things sort of relate. This would be what structured data looks like. When it comes to the internet, however, it was different. The data was not structured. Content, websites, there was no structure to it. Developers could create content any way they wanted. There was no standards as to how they did it, and this presented a lot of challenges. If we go to this next slide, what we call Web 1.0, which was a read-only. Initially, the internet was basically just that. It was servers that would present static HTML documents to users, and that was it. There was nothing else that could be done. A user wasn't able to do anything, right? And Google could crawl this information, and the way they did it was through identifying keywords in that content. So, for example, your page, Google would crawl through that page, and it would identify the amount of keywords, and if there was one that was reoccurring often, or one based on the placement of where it was at. Say it was in an H1 tag, the header, or if it was in a title tag. These were signals to Google crawling your site that, hey, this is what this is about. But it really only understood that it was just a keyword, right? It didn't actually know what it meant. It was just a keyword.
Just a keyword. And this is, to give a little bit of timeline, this is around late 90s, early 2000s.
Early 2000s, yeah. Right, yeah. I mean, Google didn't start really crawling the web till about 99, and then the early 2000s as well as when they started ramping up. And there wasn't a whole lot of internet content out there. It was mainly like, when it first started, it was a lot of scientific papers, and e-commerce really hadn't come along, but it was starting. So essentially what had occurred was technology obviously was advancing. We had new technology like Ajax, PHP, stuff that really created a more interactive web 2.0, which we call the read and write. And in Web 2.0, this allowed users to create content without even knowing how to code. Like, you didn't have to know how to code. You had WordPress. You can create a WordPress blog, and you can just go ahead and create any content you want. Well, what this did was it created an explosion of content on the internet.
Websites, tons and tons of websites.
Exactly. And going back to the structured data reference, none of this stuff was structured in any way. So Google's crawling this content, trying to find keywords, yet there wasn't much to help them identify the semantic or the meaning of the content that was being put out there.
It's interesting to note that as you're going through, like with Web 1.0 and the timeline that we're looking at, late 90s, early 2000s, that the SEO industry, that there was like, people are smart, right? They understood how Google worked, and they gamed the system.
Right.
That's why you see in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, you get the keyword stuffing, right? Where it's a very keyword based. And then it evolves to, oh, now I'm going to do spammy links because that's what the algorithm was looking at. And so the evolution of Web 1.0 and 2.0, you can see the evolution of different gamification or different gaming of the system that marketers had done.
Yeah, they were manipulating the content. Keyword stuffing was basically taking keywords, stuffing it into the content, sometimes making it the same color, the font the same color as the background, so it wasn't visible to the user, but Google would crawl it and see it. And you would see a lot of these websites that were just irrelevant content ranking for query terms, and it was providing an undesirable result for searchers. And Google understood this. They knew it was happening. There was a lot of updates that they came out with, some like Panda, Penguin. These are popular updates that they eliminated that sort of abuse that web developers were doing or marketers were doing.
Yeah.
But there was still this problem that Google had, and it was that they still didn't understand the meaning of the content. They didn't get the semantics of it. For example, here, the disambiguation of keywords such as Boston. If a search user typed in, hey, Boston, well, what does that mean? Are we talking about one of the 20 plus cities, Boston? Are we talking about the Boston Celtics? Are we talking about the band, Boston, right?
The best band.
Yeah. Essentially, Google wanted to solve this problem. They wanted to come up with a way to disambiguate this, and they also wanted to come up with a way that was relevant to trends and location. So, for example, if you were typing in Boston, and let's say it was during the playoffs and Boston Celtics happened to be in the playoffs, Google wanted to use that as, hey, they're obviously in this context trying to find out information, maybe the score of the game or whatnot, not necessarily Boston. But let's say, there was another situation where Boston was trending for some other reason. Google wanted to catch that and be able to provide those results, and it just couldn't at the time because they didn't understand the semantics of content.
And so what we have here on the next slide is an example of just a basic HTML. I'm pretty sure everyone that's listening has seen something along these lines. They should be very familiar with this. You can see H1, H2, H3. There's a paragraph. There's some links. There's a telephone number. There's a contact us. But if we're looking at this from like a crawler's eyes? Like, what does the crawler see?
Right.
Can they interpret this?
Right. I mean, Google's pretty smart. Like, I don't want to say Google doesn't understand. They do a lot of work on their side. But in this example, really all a crawler understands is, hey, I have some HTML and it's marking up some content. So I have an H1 that says contact us and an H2 boostability. And so what signals to the crawler, this is all this is. This is the heading, right? This is a paragraph. But what contact us and boostability is, it doesn't know. Like, it doesn't understand what that means. There's no ability for it to understand the relationship that call us is related to the next line in the paragraph, the actual phone number.
And that it's all related to boostability, or it's all related to an organization, right?
Right. So that brings us to, why we need to structure our data on the content.
Yeah.
Google introduced in 2009 an initiative. It was actually a joint initiative between Google, Yahoo, Bing, the Russian search engine Yandex. Yeah. They got together and said, hey, let's formulate a way that we can insert metadata. We can have users insert metadata into their content that will signal to us what the meaning of that content means. And schema.org was the initiative, and we're going to go into just a brief example of sort of the website of schema.org. Here you can quickly see, let's say you were.
One second, we're getting it up.
Okay. Not up.
It's not showing yet.
We're trying something new with this webinar. We might
not be able to, and that's okay. if we, it's fine.
It's not showing up.
Okay. We'll link the URL into the slides here so you can look at it. But initially, schema.org was a collaboration where they accumulated vocabulary. So it was a collection of vocabularies that existed where you could say, if you were a business, you can identify that the content that was on your site was related to a business. And we'll show an example of that next. Let's go to the next slide just to show it. So, sorry, we're jumping around, sorry. So here's an example, that same example of HTML, basic HTML that we looked at. Here's one where it's marked up with structured data. And as you can see, we have some additional what are called meta tags that are within the content, within the HTML. We have a term called item scope. And what we're saying here to Google is, hey, we're going to define the scope of this content. Then you have item type, and we're saying, Google, this content is about an organization. Yeah. What we have next in the H2 is a property, item prop, meaning property. So we can have properties to these types or entities. So we're letting Google know, hey, this is about an organization. The name is Boostability. The telephone is this, our email is this, our address is this, here's our location. And if you go, you can kind of go through and see, we've even included geo coordinates as well. This is the data, the markup that Google needs to understand the semantics or the meaning of the website.
Yeah, and if you're following along with this, or if you're not familiar with code, or this is very, very simple. And if you're a small business, going through schema.org, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to kind of walk you through and be like, hey, this is what schema.org looks like. This is how you can interpret this information. This is how you can identify what you should mark up on your site and about yourself, so Google can then easily serve that up. This is really simple. So I'm glad that we have Brady here to kind of break it down, to make it simple, because he's been doing this a good long time. He's like you mentioned at the beginning, very, very experienced. He's seen every mistake under the sun. He's worked on every type
and made every mistake under the sun.
And so it's very. Don't look at this and feel daunted. Don't look at this and be.
It might seem intimidating, but what we're trying to what we're trying to just illustrate here is the additional markup that we can add into the HTML to help Google understand the content, the semantics of that content.
Yeah. Which in the next slide, what we go through is just, it's an illustration of these relationships. As you can see here on the left, if you draw your eye to the slide, there's Samsung and Apple. This is an example of an entity, an attribute, and a value. And so it's called...
Well, what we're saying, what we want to illustrate here is how that markup creates relationships to other markup, and how Google can extrapolate that markup and data to form relationships between entities. And this is in essence the nuts and bolts of how Google pulls content in search in rich results. This is how it obtains what it needs to put into the rich results, because it understands the semantics. And so here's an illustration of just how that works.
Yeah, so you have Samsung is organization. Samsung has a product. They have these 3 different products. They've got a lot of other products, but this is just the example. So they have an S10, a Tab S6, a Notebook 9 Pro. And of those things, the type of those products are either a laptop, a cell phone, or a tablet. The same thing with Apple. They've got the iPhone, the iPad, the MacBook. And so you can see, if you disseminate this information, and if you were to look at this, we've included the organization, the product, the type of product, and we've included, like, for example, a memory size. You can also include different things like
other attributes, like color,
any attribute,
screen size, right? So, and this is, this is to help you understand sort of how this works. For example, how Google understands this, right? So if we were to create an entity and name it Samsung, we've identified the products that it has, we've added attributes to those products. What happens is, if you're going to do a search query, and let's say, for example, I'm going to search for Samsung S10, well, I would easily get that. But let's say that the query was a little more complex. It was more of a question like, what laptops do Samsung sell? Well, in the old way of Google doing it, it could only identify keywords of the query. So it would just know laptops and Samsung. That's it. It couldn't create a relationship to what type of laptops it had. But now with this sort of additional markup that, say they mark this up, they would then understand, oh, you're looking for, so laptop, Samsung, you're looking for the Notebook Pro 9. It connects the data that way. I'm looking for a cell phone that's 256 gigabytes. What do you have? Google can see cell phone, it's related to an iPhone, and an S10 has that. And so that's sort of how this is what's called a data graph. And this is how Google understands or interprets the relationship between these entities.
And that's how they will serve it up on the SERPs, depending on whatever query you're doing. They've identified and they've gone through this. And how did they do that? How did they go back through, and how did they solve for this semantic issue?
Right. Yeah. So that's a good question. One of the things that happened was in I can't remember, late 2000s, they had acquired a company called MetaWeb. MetaWeb was this company that had already created over 20 million entities and the relationships using this sort of graph data. Sorry. Tongue twister. Yeah. So, and they had created about 20 million of these entities and all the relationships and attributes. And that was using things like what would be kind of like schema.org vocabularies and whatnot. With that, what they did was acquired that, gained that knowledge, and they built out what was called the knowledge graph, Google's knowledge graph, which is essentially this. It was creating entities for things and the relationship that those entities have with other entities. Eventually, they ended up getting rid of, deprecating
or
MetaWeb.
Assimilating it.
And then dumped it all into Wikidata. So basically, Wikidata feeds into Wikipedia, right? So everything they see on Wikipedia is part of that, and that's how Google understands or uses that to present things where you're asking a question like Mars, right? If I typed in Mars, it's going to provide a bunch of results in the search result, a rich snippet of things, usually getting pulled from like Wikipedia or the NSA documents.
So do you think that if I was a small business owner, would I need to consider consider doing these things or addressing or being involved in the knowledge graph? Do you think how is this knowledge?
How does this relate to me as a business owner?
Yeah.
What is all this? How does this work? Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question, and the answer is depends.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of business are you?
Yeah.
Like, what is the product you're providing? Is it very esoteric? Does it need to be described extensively?
Right. Let's say you're just you're a local boutique selling clothes, and you want to have a featured snippet. Well, if you've marked up your clothing items saying, hey, this is a blouse and it is red and it is these sizes, you've added these attributes to these products. Well, when someone queries that, you're likely to have those things featured in a rich result.
Mm-hmm.
But the depends part depends on a lot of things, and we can go over some of those things right now.
So the practical of this information.
Yeah, vocabularies and syntaxes, like we want to just kind of briefly go over a little more about implementing it. So just want to distinguish the differences between what a vocabulary and a syntax is. So schema.org is a vocabulary. Those are the things that are going to identify the entity or the object that you have. A product, I have a business, I'm a news organization, whatnot. HepNets has another vocabulary that's a little more extensive. As I said earlier, schema.org is a collection of different vocabularies. They've added some of the HepNets vocabulary, which is called good relations. So if you're going through schema.org trying to going through the hierarchy of or the ontology of these entities, and you're not finding specifically what you're looking for, like I'm a clothing store, then good chances you can go to good relations and find it there too. And Google accepts this vocabulary. Wikipedia is another one, and we can go a little more. Syntaxes is different, right? So syntaxes is initially how you go about implementing the vocabulary into the content. You can use RDFA. The example we saw earlier was microdata, but then there's the preferred and probably the easiest way to implement structured data, and that's using JSON LD. And JSON LD just stands for JavaScript Object Notation Linked Data. That probably sounds super intimidating, like what? I don't know any of this. But really, it's super simple. I'll show you an example of what it looks like. There's not really any code or anything happening. All we're doing is just creating a markup. So,
and this kind of goes back a little bit into the example that we were talking about before we got into the vocabularies and syntaxes, where it's, oh, if you're a business, it depends, right? It depends what do you need to mark up. This is what it looks like, and this is how you can implement it specifically.
Right. For in this situation, for the boostability content here, we're identifying this content, and this is something that could turn into being that business profile on the side bar, right? Using, in this syntax, the JSON LD, we're saying, hey, at context, you see that we're saying, hey, we're using the schema.org vocabulary. We have an at type. We're identifying what type of entity it is. It's an organization. And then you have all the properties, name, URL, logo. And this is a script that you can create, and we'll show some, I guess we can't because we wanted to go into Google's tool. We'll link that in there, but Google's tool will create templates like this. So after the webinar, go ahead and check that URL out.
Yeah.
You can go into the different rich results that they have to offer. You go into that.
And they have a sandbox.
They'll have a sandbox. They'll have a little template where you can just grab it and then just change the content that's suitable for what you're doing.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be too hard. Again, if it is, getting a developer is good. Reaching out to us, we can help out with that as well.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, you got Brady working on it. He knows what he's talking about.
Hey. So moving forward. So we want to talk more about the strategy. We want to talk about more about like what you were saying. How it depends. How do I get this? What should I be looking for in my content to mark up? And what are the chances that my stuff ends up becoming a rich result?
Yeah. So there's been, with the strategy, there's a lot of different strategies, and then their strategy is dependent on different types of results. again, going back to the beginning of the webinar when we talked about we want to talk about rich results, we want to talk about featured snippets, we want to talk about position 0, all these different terminologies. The landing a rich result, ultimately, all of this is up to Google. You need to put your best foot forward. You need to mark up the data as much as you can, because you need to describe these entities and the relationships between these entities. So Google has the opportunity to actually serve that information to the user. And understanding all of this, all of the context that we've kind of laid out, the semantic web and how that is meant to be, you then begin to understand, okay, this is how I should present myself to Google so they can then do this. On the next slide, with the landing a rich result, there's a few tips that you can do, and a lot of it is about changing how you address your content. So if you're working with your content team, you want to use conversational tone. You want to create content that answers questions. Because if you're thinking about a featured snippet specifically, it's almost always an answer to a question, right? It's almost always, who is this? Where is that? How to do this? And if you're answering that specifically in your content and you're marking it up appropriately and you're already ranking, you're doing well, then you're probably going to land that rich result. There's different trigger words. I know that Moz did a really good, a very in-depth look as far as what specific types of featured snippets will be triggered by what specific words, and so you can check that out. But it's interesting. I believe how was the significant leader, where it's how to do, how.
Right, yeah.
Kind of thing. Another piece of advice, if you take, for example, a SERP and you Google your own business and you see the knowledge card on the right, there's a function within Google My Business, which is the Q&A features, that you can ask questions about your business and you can give the answers yourself. You should do that.
Right, yeah. I mean, most people will probably have a FAQ page, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a perfect spot to do that. If you don't, consider that. Consider thinking about some of the questions people frequently ask you or would ask you regarding your business, your services, your products, and answer them in a FAQ, and then you can mark that up. So then in the knowledge card, that FAQ is presented right there.
Yeah.
Super useful.
Very, very useful.
Yeah, so landing a featured snippet, like, what else do I need to do to get that, right? We talked about, first and foremost, you got to mark up your content. And you got to do it right. There's a lot of rules. Using the Google Developers Guide, which we'll link to, is very self-explanatory, I think, but maybe that's because
you're in it every day. You're not doing a different business. You're doing that specifically.
Yeah, but I think overall it's good to understand what this stuff is, even if it's not something you can do yourself. It's good to understand some of the terminologies, the concepts of how this is done, so that way if you do hire someone, you're probably going to be a little more informed and hire the right person to do this for you.
Yeah, we're going to be referencing in future slides, and the reason why I bring it up now is because the interesting fact about featured snippets is that if you're not already ranking in the top 10, your likelihood of getting a featured snippet or getting that specific, a paragraph, a list, or a video is minimal. You have to already be worthy of a featured snippet, so you already have to be on the front page, and so you have to be abiding by Google's already rules. And what I'm referencing is Ahrefs in 2017 did a deep dive on structured data on featured snippets.
To that right now, it's 31, slide 31. Yeah.
And so, and this is what we're referencing specifically is where featured snippets tended to rank. This is one of the examples where it says if you're rank 1, the probability of you getting a featured snippet was about a little bit over 30%. If you were on rank 2, it was 23, 3, 15. So that's just how that graph works. And this is from, I think that they did hundreds of thousands of search like results.
Different queries,
yeah,
right?
that they were pulling this data. And so it's interesting to see on that graph, the top 5 was the vast majority. So you have to be compliant by Google. You have to be worthy of the featured snippet already. And that's how you, as part of the cycle on the.
And that's where the depends comes when we said depends. And I think, you know, when you look at opportunity cost and what you should be allocating your budget to, if you're not in the top 10 already for the query, there's not necessarily a point to start marking your data up. If you can do it, great.
Mhm.
If it's cheap, do it. But that money could be used in other sort of ways to hit the top 10, whether it be
traditional
backlink building
Yeah.
or adding more copy content to your website. There's a lot of other things you can do that would be better use of your budget before you start thinking about doing this.
Yeah. Let's go back to 29. So this wheel, and what I'm trying to illustrate here is, if you're a small business, landing a featured snippet, just because you've landed it doesn't mean that you're going to keep it forever. You need to make sure that you're tracking. You need to make sure that you're testing. And so you've identified your keywords, you've done the keywords, you've seen that they either have a featured snippet or they don't have a featured snippet. You're in the top 10, and then you need to be very concise. You need to have, again, like with the rich result, you need to have that conversational tone. You need to answer the questions that are being posed from the query. Once you've done that, then you can include the microdata from Google, and then you can adjust, okay, I want to add reviews, I want to add articles, this is a local business, this is an organization, you're going through and you're doing that. Then the nice tool that SEMrush has is they help identify opportunities for featured snippets, and it's something that I like to use, and it's something
right.
that
You can also see what your competitors are ranking at for their rich snippets, and perhaps you can target that and outbeat them with that rich snippet.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool features in the SEMrush tool. Quite a few tools that you can use. You can use the Screaming Frog tool, which will help you identify the content being marked up, validate it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, SEMrush is great. You can go in, check your keywords, see what you might already be ranking for, or you might already have some featured snippets for some results. So going in and using it will identify it. It will also has a tool that kind of projects what it would look like if you got it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really a combination of optimizing your content for the rich snippet. So that's manipulating the content, whether it's adding a question and answer,
Mm-hmm.
and then also marking that up. You need to do both to really optimize for getting that featured snippet.
Okay. And then going forward, what we want to address, we know that there's an overarching fear. I say fear, but
we've heard this before.
Yeah, the question is, should I try to be getting these types of results? And again, it goes back to it depends.
Well, the question is, will I lose traffic if I have a featured snippet and it provides the answer right there on the SERP? What's the chance of the user then clicking through into my website? Why would they? They already have the answer. They don't need to. And so that's the will I lose traffic basically?
In the results, or in the study that Ahrefs did, they said that it looks like featured snippet is stealing clicks from the #1 ranked result. So if you're already ranking #1 in the SERPs for this, it's probably not. You shouldn't be trying to get the featured snippet. Is that how we interpret that?
No, because if not, then your competitor's going to get it and they're going to steal your clicks, right? So I mean, it's a game of just being competitive and getting it all the time. I would say always try to get it. Always try to have it. If you're not at #1, and that's another thing, is you can go through using the SEMrush, looking at queries where you're ranking within the top 10, but you're not at #1, and it's easy pickings. Like, hey, let's target and try to get a featured snippet for this query. And the other question is it a ranking factor? If having featured snippet, marking up my data, is that going to help me organically increase in rankings. And what we've seen is directly no, marking up your content, having a feature, that isn't a ranking signal for Google. But what it does indirectly do is it increases traffic, it affects your bounce rate because people are more likely to absolutely know what they're clicking into, so they're going to get what they want.
Yeah, and your dwell time, if you're ranking for that, then it should be good enough content. Your dwell time should be high. It should
Those
be answering
things
that question.
are going to increase your organic ranking. So this is a way to increase traffic, help with your bounce rate, and those things absolutely are going to help you increase in your organic ranking.
So rank for them. It's important. Let's go to 32. Yeah, if there is no featured snippet served up, what does that mean? And never will. When Brady and I were preparing for this, it was very interesting when we both saw this slide. I saw it in one way and Brady saw it in another way, and it's very, very interesting. So if you look at this graph, of the queries that they looked, they saw that only 12.3% had featured snippets. And then the rest, the 87.7%, did not. So when I was looking at that as a marketer, I was like, oh man, that's just a small piece of the pie that I'm trying to get. But that's not how you should look at it, right?
I looked at it differently. I said, hey, look, there's 87% of the queries that I could easily get a rich snippet for, like in likeliness, right? So using these tools, looking at these things, it's super important to go through and find what you can mark up, what you can try to target for a featured snippet. I think at the end of the day, as a business, some of these strategies, some are these fears that some people might have. I think at the end of the day, whether you increase or decrease traffic, that's not the ultimate goal for you. The ultimate goal for you is to convert. You're trying to make money, whether it's trying to get them to buy that thing or subscribe to that service that you have. That's the goal. And just more exposure, like he who screams loudest is heard, right? And so having a featured snippet is going to make you scream louder than your competitor. Things that you really need to ask yourself. Does Google consider my business as an entity? Does Google consider my product to be an entity? Does it understand the relationships that my business and products or services have with each other and with the industry that you're in, the vertical you're in? I think when you look at that and you Google your own stuff, look and see, is Google seeing me the way that I want them to see me?
Yeah, I think it's very, very important. And the last slide that we have here, I think it sums it up quite nicely. Where we look back at the history of the web, Web 1.0, 2.0, you can see the keywords, the links, those things are very important. But that type of mentality where you're just identifying keywords or you're just trying to go and score keywords, that mentality is not enough, and it's not going to be enough going forward. So just make sure that you're looking at these entities, these relationships, and keywords.
Marketing the entity versus the keyword, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because then you're now thinking, other ways that your entity relates to things, and you can optimize for those additional relationships that you might have. We're happy. We're excited that we're able to do this. I know a lot of it was, we wanted to get a little deeper in a lot of things. We just don't have the time. We wanted to cover a lot of topics. We hope you gained a lot of knowledge or information out of this. We have our, we're opening up to Q&A right now. Is that right, Christine?
We're actually just about out of time. Okay. So I've got several questions here. I've asked them to send us their email directly. So if you want to do that, we'll get all your questions answered directly. There's some that are kind of deep, so I want to be able to respond, have you guys respond to them in the way that they can.
Yeah, so that'd be fun.
Again, you're welcome to reach out to us at Boostability is our Twitter. We'll be happy to respond to any of these. We will also be making this recording available through our YouTube page, and then we'll provide the slides as well, so you can download and get a little bit more. You can look through these again. So with that, I want to thank Mike and Brady for their time. This has been awesome. I hope you've all found it educational and effective, and you've had some good questions come up. So with that, we will talk to you all later. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.